This is the Germans from Russia Experience, Episode 5, Foods of the Germans from Russia, with special guest Connie Coberly. Welcome to the Germans from Russia Experience. I am your host, Elisa Rodriguez, and I am here to inspire you to learn anything and everything about your own family heritage by sharing information, experience, and stories about a special group of people, the Germans from Russia. Hello, everyone. I am Elisa, your host and creator of this podcast, and today I am here with a very special guest, Connie Coberly. I have known Connie all of my life. The time that we most spent together was through attending the Cross Church, which is was a huge Volga German church in Fresno, having over 2,000 members in the late 1960s. I am so honored to have Connie here today to talk about our cultural foods because she is an incredible cook and baker. And she makes things look so easy. I wish we had a tasting portion for this episode. Hello, Connie.
Hello.
Before we get started talking about foods, I want to let our listeners know that we are both Volga German descendants that grew up in Fresno, California. So the foods that we are going to talk about are not all the same as in other areas of the country. And if they are similar, they often have different names, and we might not know all of the names, but you will probably recognize these items. Okay, let's start with what did our ancestors eat way back along the Volga River? So what do you know about?
Well, they had to eat what they grew, and they did grow watermelons that got as big as water kegs. We know they grew sunflower seeds because they brought the sunflower seeds here with them, and they called them Russian peanuts.
Yes, yes.
And foods made from flour that was milled from the wheat they grew. It's why when we were growing up, we ate a lot of carbohydrates because sometimes our meal would consist of making dumplings and potatoes or of making meatless meals just with the flour and whatever fruit we had handy.
And also breads, too. Do you think they made breads? Do you think
yes.
rye bread is that old?
I haven't done rye bread, but they made a lot of rye bread when I think it's just the time you were raised in. But, we didn't always have meat for supper, so we ate a lot of things made with the flour.
And how did they prepare these foods? Probably open fire. I mean, that's kind of the archaic way of doing things.
Yeah, or maybe a wood stove of some kind. I was talking about the samovar. They heated water in that so they could have hot water all day and make their tea.
That's like a kettle, right?
It's a tall pot that has a middle you put coals in.
Oh, okay.
And then you can, has a handle on it that you can let the hot water out.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And then they would, use that for different cooking things, teas, coffees, whatever they were. Yeah.
It was their microwave.
Ah, I see. All right. So in talking about food preparation, I know when I talk to people that come in here to the Historical Society, they ask about summer kitchens or they talk about summer kitchens. What do you know about summer kitchens?
I think summer kitchens were used for anything that had to be cooked for a long time, like making watermelon syrup. It takes forever to cook it down into a syrup or into a molasses, and they like their watermelon molasses to make coffee cake with.
Oh.
And then I suppose in the heat of summer, maybe they would do part of their cooking back in the summer kitchen just because it would keep the house cooler.
Okay, and this is like a shed away from the house?
Yeah, in Germantown, where my grandparents lived, they had a patio in the back, and then behind the patio, they'd have a little room that they called their summer kitchen. And I think Grandma made things like homemade soap back in there also.
And you mentioned the watermelon syrup. I heard that was a very stinky process.
Yes.
Even though it came out with something very sweet and lovely, it was hard to get there.
I made it one time in my lifetime. My mother gave me the insides of watermelons when she was making watermelon pickles. And so I cooked it down, and it took so long to cook it down. And then all of a sudden it turns to the heavier syrup. You got to be careful. You might burn it after all the time you've been spent getting it there.
Yeah. I saw a video through YouTube a year or so ago about the process of making the watermelon syrup. I'll try to link that in my show notes so that you all can have a look at that if you'd like to. Okay, so recipes that were brought from the Volga, or the earliest recipes that we know about. Where do we want to start?
Well, let's start with Bierock.
Okay.
Bierocks were called pierogi in Russia. Only I always think that the Germans, thrifty Germans, didn't want to just use all meat like the pierogis had. So they combined it with the cabbage they grew and with onions, and made a very savory sandwich, as you know. Everybody has their own idea of how the filling for Bierock should be. And my dad wouldn't eat my Bierocks because he said I didn't put enough pepper in them.
I like a lot of pepper. You can always add that after, though, too, right? But if you put too much, you can't take it back.
And then they cooked what they had, what they grew. And so when they got here, I think they just adapted to what was available here. And one thing nice about Fresno is you have so many fruits and so many vegetables. And so it was, I'm trying to think of some other, Blina was something they brought with Russia, which is like a pancake.
Yes, like a crepe.
And it was almost like a tortilla. In some cases, you could take and wrap whatever you wanted in the Blina.
Yeah.
And eat it. And then our kuchen, or Kuga, was a coffee cake that had was sweet bread on the bottom and fruit and streusel on the top. And that came, it came from Germany, and it went to Russia, and it got a little bit changed because of what they were able to get and use.
Now, here in Fresno, as we mentioned, where we live, I think there's been two types of Kuga that I've noticed. The yeast bread, the one that you and I prefer, and then there's one that's more cake-like that people make. Yeah,
I know in every German cookbook they have one, what I call brown sugar coffee cake.
Oh, okay.
And I wondered sometimes if they weren't able to get the watermelon molasses, is that how they made it one that tasted closest to making a Kuga with a watermelon molasses? It's a little sweeter than that. But you'll notice in your cross-church cookbook, they have recipes for brown sugar coffee cake.
Yeah, I think I've seen that.
And so I put it into our cookbook also.
Oh, okay, great. Now, for the fruits, they used what they had, right? I know a lot of people that come around here that I've talked to, they ask about boysenberry. Boysenberry is really the big one that they ask for, and those are really hard to find. I did some research on boysenberries, and they require a lot of water. And here in the valley, it's so hot that it's a very short growing season, and so farmers just aren't growing boysenberries like they used to in the 1950s around here. So those are hard to come by.
I know when my mother made Kuga, she used apples a lot, and I think probably in Russia they grew apples also.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah, not right away, but later.
Or just left it plain on top with streusel on top of the coffee cake, and maybe the pudding. They make a pudding out of sour cream or sweet cream with an egg.
You talking about for the spread? That goes between the bread and before the fruit. There's a spread you can put in there, like
or
a
you
custard
can even
type.
leave the fruit off and then just put your streusel on top of the pudding and cook it.
I have done fresh apple, and fresh pear, and I put cinnamon in my streusel on top, and that seems to be really good.
And I've heard that some of the people here have done grape.
I haven't done that yet. Like with the
that.
Thompsons, the big Thompsons. Yeah, a few people have mentioned that. I should try that. Of course, I've done peach. You've done strawberry, which is a little tricky because of the amount of water, right?
And that's, again, why I thicken the fruit that I put on top. Just enough to keep it from rolling off when the dough starts rising.
Or rolling all to the center because it kind of rises on the sides. Yeah.
And you have to be careful with coffee cake when you're making it. Don't cover it too soon, or your streusel ends up being soggy.
Right. Just put a paper towel on top or something
Or,
so the
yeah,
moisture
I think
can.
Mother used to put just a towel on top.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then what I like to do if I have to make it ahead of time is freeze it immediately. Because I always say a Kuga that's made the day before is day-old bread when you serve it. So when you freeze it, it helps. Once it gets cool, you can cover it to freeze it. But you have to make sure it's very cool.
Well, I do want to mention about the Kuga. Last year, a year ago I did one with pumpkin because I love pumpkin. I like to make pumpkin breads and pumpkin things. And so I put pumpkin for my my fruit, canned pumpkin, and I also put a cream cheese for my spread. And it came out really good. I really like that one.
Yeah, that's, people think they have to stick so closely to the recipe, and you can come up with your own ideas.
Yeah. All right, noodles. We just had a noodle making week here at the Historical Society. What do you know about noodles?
Well, in our museum room we have here, we have some 2x4s. One was an original new one, and they put it up a little bit on legs to make it sit. And one was one with a curve in the middle. And I was told that women used to cut their noodles on this.
Oh.
My mother would roll her noodle dough out to the shape of a pie crust and then fold it in half and roll it up like a cinnamon roll.
Okay.
Now, she didn't use the noodle board, but she would put it on a breadboard of some kind, and she'd put her thumb right up against the end, and she'd move her thumb backwards as she was cutting the noodles. And she got so good at it, her noodles were so thin that my brothers complained when she started using a noodle machine that they weren't as thin as Grandma used to make.
Wow, that's amazing.
But,
yeah, I never saw the noodle boards until I started coming here.
I
grandma
haven't seen
just
those
cut them
before either.
Yeah, my grandma used the machine even in her kitchen. She had the cutting machine. She used it at home too.
Yeah, which is a lot easier, thank goodness. But I think a lot of people are grateful right at this time because we just finished with our noodle baking. And the people have come in and bought the noodles at what I consider an incredible price. We had to raise the price because the price of flour and eggs had gone up. So we raised it to $7 a bag. And they're still buying.
Yeah, they're willing to.
And we run out before.
It's very nostalgic, that's for sure. And they're yummy.
And then Bierock's, Elisa's been doing that with classes. And we were just discussing the differences. You can use for bread, you can use frozen bread dough if you can find it, Bridgeford.
Yeah.
Some of my friends used to use
those Pillsbury hot roll mix. Yes, I've heard of that.
You can make it from scratch.
Yeah.
And making it from scratch is great, but then it's hard to figure out how many you'll make. So you may end up in the middle making some more.
And it's intimidating for people too to mess with that yeast.
Yeah. Oh, I don't mind doing a yeast bread, but it's Bierocks are work. There's a lot of different parts to them, and so it's nice to have the bread be easy. When we used to make them in the thousands from the churches, we always bought the bread from a bakery.
Right. The dough already prepared.
And then I was talking about when we, as my mother was making them, she would roast a chuck roast, and then she'd take and grind it into finer
meat
pieces.
Grinder.
And then you kind of equaled the cabbage and onions you sautéed with the amount of meat you had. And so you just have to, everybody has their own taste.
Yeah, I've never actually done them with the roast. When they made them in the thousands, like you mentioned, at the Cross Church or at the Edison Social Club, did they use the roast or did they use ground beef? They did.
That was the way to make Bierock, so that's the way they did it.
Wow.
And so it was, they had a machine that rolled it out into like a tortilla size, and they put it on pieces of paper and set them on the table, and then we just put a scoop of filling and pinch them. And how they got, they had a lot of people.
Yes.
That was it. They had a lot of volunteers.
A lot of volunteers.
And we can always use a lot of volunteers around here.
For sure. All right, Varenicks, that's kind of related to noodles and Bierocks with the dough. How is that dough different?
I think it's just a little softer than the noodle dough. Okay. You can roll it out a little easier, which is nice. My mother always, again, rolled it out like a pie crust, and then she cut it into 4 pieces.
Okay, so this is like a dumpling, the Varenicks, right? Mm-hmm. Do we know any other names?
Only it's a fruit dumpling,
right?
I think
Or it could be savory. It could have potato,
Yes.
onion. I did some potato, onion, sauerkraut, and then my other ones were apple.
Yeah. Those are mostly the ones my mother did, were the apple and potato. Only she just did sautéed onions in her potato.
Mm-hmm. So you
And
make the little triangle, and you put your filling, whatever it's going to be, pinch it closed, and then you put it into boiling water to
Right.
cook it, right? And it only takes like 3 minutes. It's
yeah,
very
they float
quick.
to the top when they're done.
Very quick.
And they now what we ate them just straight out of the kettle with cream and butter on. Mm-hmm. And then if we had leftovers, we would take and fry them in butter. Now, some people fry them in butter immediately after they bring them out of the dough. So it just depends on what you like.
Yeah.
But I was telling you about a trick my mother learned for strawberry Varenicks.
Okay.
And strawberry Varenicks have a lot of juice.
Yes.
And what they've always done with juicy fruits, they took and browned bread in butter, and then they would put it in with the fruit to absorb the juice. Well, strawberries sometimes even defied that. They didn't want to get thick. So the recipe in our cookbook calls for cornstarch as well as the bread. And then they even called for an egg that you tempered and put into the filling a little
And
at
that can
a
be
time.
a little tricky because you don't want that egg to cook.
No,
in
you
the hot
take
liquid.
and put a little bit of hot top filling in at a time until it gets closer to the temperature that the filling is. But also to keep it from, when it ran, it would the edges wouldn't stick together right. So my mother found out from someone, if you took a ring from a jam jar and put it upside down and lay your little triangle of dough there and put the filling in it, the filling would go below.
It kind of cradles it.
Yes,
Yeah.
it would go below the surface. So when you picked your edges up to pinch together, they
Right.
wouldn't be into the filling.
Right, because if the filling spills over the edge of where you're going to squeeze it, you can't close it because it's wet.
Yeah, you
It'll pop
might
open.
even think you have it closed, and then when you put it in your pot to boil it, you end up with strawberry water.
Yeah.
But,
So the jar ring is great if you have a liquid that's loose. Now you mentioned putting bread in with the fruits. That was the recipe I used when I did my apple Varenicks, and it had me. I think it was toast the bread and then crumble it kind of in there, and so it would thicken it. And I thought, well, this is going to taste funny, but it didn't. It was great.
Yeah.
It was really,
You've
really
got
good.
that buttery flavor in there, and it's really good.
And with my strawberry ones, I did what you mentioned. We boiled them, and then the next day I fried them in butter, and then I had them with the cream or butter, probably cream. Yeah. And they were so delicious. Very, very good. Okay, so we did mention Blina before, but we'll talk about this again. These are like crepes. And one thing that I want to say about the Blina is that in my cooking demonstration class here at the American Historical Society of Germans from Russia, we made 3 different batches. I wanted to compare the flavors of each of these different batches because the recipes varied so much. So one was a yeast recipe that you were to let set overnight and a few more ingredients added before cooking the next morning. The second batch was an early morning recipe. It said it also used yeast, and you were to let it sit for 3 hours before cooking. So I prepared that one. And then there was one that was an on-the-spot recipe. There was no yeast involved. You just mix your ingredients and you cook them right away. So I wanted to compare the flavors of these 3 because I really do love the yeast flavor. But it's time consuming and it takes planning in order to make it ahead the night before or even the morning before. We were all so surprised. I really thought that the one with the yeast was going to be much tastier, but really we had difficulty telling them apart, the 3 different recipes.
I've always thought that one made with yeast might hold the pancake together better when you were trying to roll it. But I haven't done Blina too much.
They were all fine. They all one of them tasted a little more egg forward, like a crepe might be. But that one did have more eggs in it, so that's why I don't remember which one it was. But yeah, the smell of Blina really brings back my childhood memories. My grandmother made those for us every morning when we would stay the night. So that was great. Okay. Anything else about Blina? You said you didn't make them much, so all right. Okay, on to Broda. Broda. What is Broda?
Okay, broda is just basically a roasted meat with potatoes and carrots and maybe, I think Mother put in onion and celery.
Don't
with
forget
hers.
the bay leaves.
Oh, the bay leaves,
Yes,
yes.
got to have those bay
And
leaves.
I've never quite gotten the broda. Maybe I'm not remembering right, but it doesn't seem like it tastes quite the same as Mother did. But I know they cooked it for a long time on a fairly low heat in the oven.
Yes.
And I think we tend not to do that much anymore because gas is so high, or electric is so high to cook it.
Yeah.
But it's a roasted meat with salt and pepper, and then your potatoes and carrots and stuff. And you just got to be patient. Oh, and then water, of course, in the bottom to keep it from getting too burnt on the bottom. But,
I was speaking to my cousin Richard about this dish, and I asked him how long to roast it because, as you said, they roasted it for hours and hours. And he answered, "My mom would put it in the oven before church, and when we got home, it was ready. That's how long it takes."
That's probably all he noticed as a child.
Right. So there you go.
And then we talked about Russian peanuts.
We did, yeah.
Sunflower
seeds.
Sunflower seeds.
And our people brought those here to the Central Valley. So that's a symbol that we use often in things that we create. Or there's an artist here that uses sunflowers a lot in her artwork to represent that. These dumplings,
cadevels and glaze. There were times in our childhood that we didn't have a lot of money. So sometimes cadevels and glaze, which was potatoes and dumplings.
Oh, more
was,
starch.
what we ate for supper. And I give my husband a bad time because he was born on an Iowa farm, and so they had access to meats and corn and a lot of things. I said, yeah, you had a nice balanced diet, and I was raised on dough. And he has more trouble with his stomach than I do.
Oh, speaking of dough, Grebel. By lots of names. I've heard Cribble. I don't know. Those are the one. Grebel's the one we use.
Mostly what I've heard.
Yeah, it's like a fluffy donut.
Well, and again, there's two kinds of those.
Yes.
They are yeast ones and just ones that you rise with.
Yeah, the yeast one is the fluffy one. Now, I remember from the cross church when we would have the picnic or the carnival, they would sell the lacy one that was more crunchy.
Oh, yeah.
I've tried to find a recipe and make that, and I can't do it. I don't know.
Have you tried the Chinese wonton?
Okay.
That you buy in the dough in the store and then you fry?
That'll work.
It'd probably come out more like the Grebel. I always said when I'd eaten the wonton that it looked like a Grebel to me, except they
just
didn't
needs powdered sugar.
Yeah, they didn't put powdered sugar on it.
Yeah.
But try that and see whether that
I will,
works.
because that would just bring back
I'm not too much
lot of
for
crazy
deep
memories.
frying anymore because of the way society is now. They don't want you to deep fry. And then potato salad, that was just something we had at every picnic we ate.
Yeah.
And I think it was different people made it different ways. I make it with dill pickle and onion.
Yeah. Do you put egg?
Yeah, eggs.
Boiled
And
eggs.
usually I put a little, I don't use pimento too much. So what I usually do is take a very red tomato and just kind of chop it up to give it some color.
I recently started buying pimento to use in my macaroni salads because my grandma did. And yeah, it gives it a pretty color. Plus, it also tastes good. So I like it.
And then celery in it too to give it the crunch.
Yep, the crunch and all those things.
And then
Well, rye bread. I know my dad always said he loved rye bread. I don't remember necessarily my grandma making it. I never cared for it as a kid, but was that a big staple?
Yeah, I think it's something that you need to have a taste for. It may just have been, again, it was one of the ingredients they had to use when they were in Russia. You know, they didn't go far enough with changing it to flour. You know, that was what am I thinking of? A more antique way of making flour. It wasn't as I can't think.
Was
of
it
the
more
word
coarse or something? Is that what you were thinking?
Yeah, it had more of the shell of the flour left
Oh,
on
okay.
it.
Yeah.
It's rye. So.
Yeah. I didn't like the way it zapped in my mouth. Like,
Yeah,
it's interesting.
It's different.
Sausage. I've never witnessed sausage being made, but people talk about. Of course, my grandmother had the meat grinder. But you've seen sausage being made.
I've seen it in two different ways. When we got married, my grandparents were here from Montana, staying the winter, and they were going to go home early, but we decided to get married in March, and so we talked them into staying. And so when they got ready, my in-laws couldn't believe it when they came out here. My dad was from a family of 13 children, and when they went into the fellowship hall to watch, all of my aunts and uncles were in there making potato salad and bread and whatever for the wedding feast. But my grandparents beat them all. They went to a market and bought ground hamburger and ground pork and then seasoned it in their own special way. I'll never tell you. I don't know how it was. They filled the sausage on my mother's kitchen table for enough for 300 people.
Wow.
They pumped it out, and everybody talked about how good the sausage was. And they just used the hand grinder that had a little funnel on the end.
Uh-huh.
And you hook the pig's casings to the end. And they cranked away after they'd mixed it up in another big bowl. And they started feeding it into the grinder and out into the pig's casings.
So even though the meat came, you said ground already, they would mix it together and then put the seasonings and then put it through the grinder again as it came out into the sausage?
Yeah, it was just more to push it out, so that it would go into the casings. But like I said, my mother was from Montana, and when I was back there, a lot of my cousins made sausage with deer meat and elk meat and mixed it with the pork that they had because it was available again. This was something they did.
Used what they had.
Gave it a unique taste.
Yeah. About the sausage again, do you think you said it was for 300 people, so it had to be at least 100 pounds of sausage, right?
It's
at least.
Amazing.
That's a lot of sausage.
Well, that wedding was amazing anyway. I married a man who was in the Navy, and we just thought we'd have a church wedding and have cake and punch downstairs. My father came home one night and he says, I was talking to a Steinhauer today. And I said, why? Alex Steinhauer. And he says, well, to hire his band for your wedding, of course. So all of a sudden we had a full-blown German wedding.
Yes,
so that was,
And you said about
all
300 people, right?
300 people.
Wow.
Filled up Christchurch.
Okay, the next question is, how did our people share their recipes? How did they keep these things going and share these recipes?
Well, other than word of mouth, then we had the cookbooks that came from the churches. And it's been about 2009, so how many years ago was that? 15?
Yeah, about 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Was the last one we did here.
We made a cookbook here. When we opened this place, we were selling some of the books that people could use, and amongst them was the cookbook. But the cookbook came from the Midwest.
Oh, okay.
And they make a lot heavier dishes than we do. Plus, they don't have the fruits and things available that we have here. So we collected recipes from our members. And if you see our cookbook, the first chapter in it is all German recipes, and then the rest are just recipes that were popular with their family.
Yeah.
But it's got some of the cookbook recipes, some of the recipes you see in the old German cookbooks. If you can't find one of them,
yeah.
People
and
resubmitted.
The churches around here, they were making cookbooks before 1970. They were putting them together because I've seen them. So they would share them that way, not just for a fundraising event, but to keep those recipes written down. Sometimes in those oldest ones, we see the amounts are like a pinch or a handful or something like that, which is interesting.
My mother, in her noodle dough recipe, told my sister-in-law and put in half an eggshell of water. And my sister-in-law kind of looked at her and she said, half of a half eggshell or half of the full eggshell?
Right. Yeah, just these different random amounts of things. Yeah.
You just have to watch it. And I noticed when I was putting the cookbook together, I'd look the recipes over, and there were still some places I missed. But one of them was a lady who was making German noodle soup. She didn't have any water in her recipe.
Oh, of course it was there. She just didn't write it down?
Well, when
Or-
you cook the soup, you have a certain pot you use and you fill it up with water.
Oh, right.
And so I guess she just wasn't thinking about the amount of water that you had to put in. So I told her, I said, come up with
An amount.
a couple gallons, a gallon, whatever. What do you put in with
Yeah.
this? So, just so they have an idea.
Right, yeah, because some people
So,
don't.
and so, a lot of, they assumed a lot that you would know more than you did.
Yes, yeah. Sometimes I read through those recipes looking for all the details, and some things aren't there. You have to
Yes.
assume from other recipes to get them, but that's kind of fun too. I noticed in my grandmother's things, she also had newspaper clippings or magazine that she took recipes from.
Well, I
She
noticed that
collected
the
all
Fresno Bee
kinds.
at one time, there was a recipe for Bierocks in the Fresno
Yes,
Bee.
I have that clipping. I do.
And so,
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, they wandered when people like something. It got out there.
So which of these foods do you still make today, Connie?
Well, I like making Kuga, and I try and make that for my friends when we work on Tuesday. I try and make Kuga at least once a month for them. Bierocks I make for my husband, and we eat them. We'll eat him one meal, and then he gets the rest of them. That's his encouragement to do work around this place.
So you put package them individually and put them in the freezer for other times. Yeah.
And then we've got in our boutique, we've got what we call Bierock bags. Now, some of you may have used potato bags, so they're similar to those. They're just a quilted bag that you put something to heat it in. And so a Bierock bag will heat a frozen Bierock in 2 minutes.
Okay, in the microwave.
In the microwave.
Yes.
And then you let it sit for just a little to make sure it's warm clear to the middle.
Yeah. Yeah, I do that too. And sometimes I like to then toast it in the toaster so that the bread gets a little
crunchier.
crunchy on the outside. Yeah, so it's not soggy or anything. But yeah. Well, I still also make Bierocks. I do not make my own yeast dough. I use the frozen Bridgeford dough, and it comes out beautiful. I love it. I also make Kuga, Varenicks, and Blina at home, and I teach classes here at the Historical Society for all of those dishes as well. So that's a lot of fun to keep the memories going and our heritage in food.
I had a great niece come help us make noodles. And when I was talking to her at Noodle Making, she said, "And Connie, why is it that people want these noodles so much?" And I said, "I think part of it is memory. Our grandmothers didn't have a Save Mart to go to and buy noodles, so they had to make everything from scratch. And we grew up with these noodles that were made from scratch, and so they leave a very pleasant memory. And then I get told I make the noodle soup for Noodle Making. And I put in the ingredients that I was raised with. And I was listening to someone as they were eating their noodle soup one time, and they said, "Oh, they've got allspice in this. Noodle soup just wouldn't be right without allspice." And I just kind of looked at them and didn't say anything because I don't have any allspice in my cabinet.
Oh, you didn't put it in there. Oh.
I use, for making it here, I use chicken thighs.
Okay.
And they're easiest to debone, and they give it a nice deep flavor. You get more for your money. I mean, if you buy a whole chicken, you've got a lot of places that doesn't have much meat on it, where the thighs are meaty all the way through. And then bay leaves, salt and pepper, and I like to put in some dehydrated onions. A couple. Well, it depends on how much you're making.
Yeah.
And just let it cook down until and then you flavor it yourself. If you feel like you want to add a little bit of chicken bouillon to it to make it just a little more chickeny, that's fine. And, you do what you like.
Yeah.
And I know, again, some people like more pepper in than I do.
Yep, I would do that. I'd probably put some carrots in there because I like the color of the carrots in there.
Now, when I was raised, my mother would cook chicken soup. The meat would come out of the soup and onto a plate. And the broth would be strained so that you had pure chicken broth. And then you put your fine noodles in.
Oh, okay.
So your noodle soup was just the fine noodles and the pure...
And the broth.
And nowadays, I tend to debone the chicken and put it right in with the soup.
Yeah.
But,
I remember making noodles in my grandma's kitchen. I remember the noodle machine and the wooden rack that we would dry the ribbons of noodles on and cutting the noodles. And then we would either spread them on the dining room table, or I remember once also on the bed.
On a
Put out
sheet
the
on
big
the bed.
sheet on the bed, and because you do have to dry them for at least 24 hours if you can spread them out
and
enough.
I know I had spread some on a bed I had, and I needed the bed to sleep in that night. So I removed them and bagged them, and I had noodles that mildewed.
Oh, yeah, you really got to get them dry.
This is why when we make noodles here, they go for, I'd say more like 36 hours before we bag them. And someone comes in and fluffs them every once in a while to make sure all the moisture gets out.
Yeah. Yeah, that's important. Memories of foods. Well, you mentioned your wedding sausage story, and one of my memories, another memory of food I have, is the way my grandmother did Christmas cookies. She would start probably in October, and any weekend that she had available, she would make one kind of cookie that whole day, like let's say walnut chocolate chip. So she would make several batches of cookies, that same cookie that day, and then we would put them in the freezer, the stand-up freezer in the garage, in layers of boxes between wax paper. And then after several weeks, she would have, 6 different types of cookies. And then the week before Christmas, we would box them up, and there would then be a huge box of variety of cookies that we would get to take home, and then she would give out to other family members or maybe neighbors, something like that. And so that's a memory that I have around food.
Yes, we were so lucky to have known our grandmothers and to know what they cooked. And the families got together so much when I was growing up, and I miss it, the fact that we don't get together as much. My family still gets together for Easter and Christmas, which I'm grateful for. And we have to bring German sausage.
Yes.
Which around here, because I knew Dennis Olberg and because I know his grandson is making it, I usually buy from Varenicks.
Yeah.
But there are other places that people like to buy German sausage from.
The place that's close to me is Choice Market, and they make a really good German sausage. I really like it a lot. So we have that. Well, thank you so much, Connie, for being here today and discussing Volga German foods. Thanks to all of our listeners, and I hope you enjoyed this as much as I have. See you next time.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you for listening to the Germans from Russia experience. I hope that something you heard today will inspire you to learn anything and everything you can about your own ancestors. If you like what you heard, please leave a review, like, and share this podcast. You can comment directly by emailing me at thegermansfromrussiaexp@gmail.com. Also, like our Facebook page, The Germans from Russia Podcast. Please see our show notes for website suggestions to begin or continue your discovery of your Germans from Russia roots, and the links to information shared today. My podcast artwork is by Matt Wall. My producer is Annie Anderson.